welcome to another edition of the Traction Reaction Podcast. I'm Steve Zautke. It's my pleasure to introduce one of my favorite guys in racing. He's been around for many, many years, Bones Bourcier. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be here. Good to see you.
And one of the reasons why we're bringing him in is his new book on Sammy Swindell. Any fan of racing, not just sprint car racing, but racing in general, will know the name Slammin' Sammy Swindell. One of the great names in sprint car racing, but it's done a lot of other things. And tell us, Bones, how this book all came about.
Oh, it's something that I bring up every couple of years, probably with Sammy, and he mentioned it a couple of times. This all started. I mean, this is even before the COVID stuff. That's how we date everything today, I guess, is pre-COVID and post-COVID. But
Right.
must have been like around 2019 or early 2020, maybe, that we were already working on it pretty heavy. Because I remember one of my interview trips to Memphis, you sort of had to deal with that, what's open and what's not open and all that. But it's something he wanted to do later in his career, and something I was interested in doing because I've always been, there's no reason to write a book about a guy unless he's interesting to you. And Sammy is endlessly interesting when you look at the things he's done and the things he's won and the things he's tried, and both technically and other divisions. To me, he's just one of those fascinating people.
I know you got the foreword written by Dr. Dick Berggren. He doesn't get, I think, as much credit as he should when he took the big leap, and I think it was 81 doing Open Wheel magazine. Because for me, I'm a kid in high school, and that Open Wheel magazine was the absolute Bible for me and my lifeline, and really opened up the world to me. Of course, we had Speed Sport News and for us, Midwest Racing News here in Wisconsin, Illinois, whatnot. But Open Wheel magazine was fantastic because it kind of let you look behind the curtain a little bit, and it was such a neat time too, because the Outlaws were started in '78 and just really started to take off, and the two guys, of course, Steve Kinser and Sammy Swindell, and we got to look into them through Open Wheel magazine, and I think that was so important. And
I agree.
Talk a bit about how that came about. I mean, a marketer's dream, Steve Kinser and Sammy Swindell, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of those enduring rivalries, where it's not just a built-up fake rivalry. I mean, those guys had a real rivalry. I know from talking to each of them that there's obviously endless respect between them, at least as far as the other person's abilities or, technical abilities, driving abilities, all that. But it was real, on a lot of occasions they clashed. But, when you run together literally 100 nights a year, and you're the two guys, and you can throw Doug Wolfgang into that mix, and sometimes Blaney and Bobby Davis and people like that. It was always the same, small group of guys coming to the front, and primarily Steve and Sammy, because Wolfgang dropped in and out of the Outlaws a few times. But, when you run that often, that hard, and you're the two guys going for the win almost every night, I think it's inevitable that you're going to have some contact here and there. And they definitely had it. And they're both really, very, very focused, determined, gritty racers. And I think that factors into the mix too. Neither one of them tried to be necessarily a nice guy on race night. They were going for the win, and you wouldn't have wanted to stand in the way between them and a checkered flag.
Of course, the iconic number one and some iconic sponsors too. Some of those cars, of course, Kinser as the 11, and Sammy Swindell as the 1 Kodiak, and then of course one of my favorite liveries, because you didn't see too many at the time. Now it seems like they're all like a flat black, but that black TMC livery was really neat with the gold lettering, gold leafing on it. That was a good looking car.
I think it's still iconic. I've seen local sprint cars and regional sprint cars, and even cars in other kind of racing, where you can almost bet that they took their cues from that car, because it's easy to say, a black car with gold lettering, but a lot of people go too far on that. The lettering is too flashy or something. And Sammy's that TMC car was a lot like the trucks. TMC Trucking, Harold Annette's company. You see those things roll up and down the road, and they're very understatedly beautiful. And Sammy's car was that way. And one of the great things about Sammy, if you were a guy like Harold Annette at TMC, Sammy prided himself on equipment that was clean. No matter what you'd been through, it was going to be as nice as he could roll it to the track. That was wax it, polish it, clean the wheels. A lot of people didn't care about that in sprint car racing back then, but I think it helped Sammy when he got channel lock. All the way through his career, he presented a professional appearance. The team was really organized. Who else can say they got FedEx and channel lock involved in short track racing, let alone TMC? Yeah, he brought some beautiful stuff to the racetrack, and it went fast. So that was the best part of it, I suppose, if you were him.
And for the mid '80s, he was involved in NASCAR racing and also IndyCar racing. Tell him how that came about.
Well, the NASCAR stuff kind of started when he was driving for Raymond Beadle. There's another one, the old Milwaukee car that Sammy had in sprint car racing for quite a while, and Sizzler Steakhouses and other corporate sponsors. But that came about through Raymond Beadle, when Raymond Beadle had the NASCAR Cup team with Tim Richmond, and of course Beadle was a great, incredibly great drag racer, and he wanted to start a sprint car team. So in the process of doing that, Sammy kind of let it be known that if there's a chance for me to run that Busch car, now and then, let's do that. So he ran that a handful of times, and of course it's hard to dip in and out of NASCAR at any level and be competitive, but he had some really good showings. And then later on, he drove a Cup car in a couple of races for Dick Moroso. I think Sammy was always on the verge of breaking in to the stock car stuff, but you got to, at the same time, had to go home and earn a living.
The one that hurts the most is when he almost was the last car to make make it in a stock block in a Futura IndyCar. That was with the centerline sponsorship, sharp looking car, and just missed out, didn't he?
That's one of my favorite stories of any car that, never mind a non-winner of the Indy 500, but a non-qualifier, put together by John Butera, the hot rod legend, actually a Wisconsin guy originally, but John moved to California when he was fairly young. But, that whole team was, the basic mechanics on the team were all hot rod legends, from John Butera down. And then the fact that he, kind of took a gamble on Sammy. Sammy had never run there before, and they were the first alternate. I mean, they were the last car to get bumped out with a stock block Pontiac, GM General Motors engine. An amazing month for them. If you go back and read the daily reports, he had a couple of incidents. One, he had a big spin when some rear body work blew off. So it was going in the corner, instant loss of all downforce. And Danny Sullivan was behind him. And Danny said to Sammy later, I don't know how in the world you saved that, but you did. So I don't think anybody ever doubted Sammy's ability to adapt to almost anything. But you know how the Indy 500 is, Steve. Back then, especially with the amount of entries they had.
Exactly.
To show up and do a one-off when your whole team is kind of one-offs, it was a big ask, I think. And but I love the story of that. It was a beautiful car. John Butera and all those hot rod guys involved, and Sammy Swindell as a driver. It's probably the greatest first alternate story maybe in the history of the Indy 500.
Very good. Yes, it certainly was, in my opinion. And then with the World of Outlaws, any particular win that kind of stands out more for you that you remember? You went to far more sprint car races than I have. Is there one thing that a Sammy Swindell story that kind of sticks out more than any other?
I wasn't at Knoxville the year he won the Nationals. I was there one of the years he lost it. It was he and Danny Lasowski. He chased down Danny, and Danny was leading the race. And of course, Danny had just come off of being a Knoxville regular for a long time. So, it was rare that Steve or Wolfie or, one of the top, or Donnie Schatz, one of the top outlaw teams wasn't going to win that thing. And Danny was, right up front for the longest time. And when Sammy tracked him down and passed him, I was upstairs on top of the roof, and it was like the air went out of the place, because everybody's rooting for the local guy. And let's face it, Sam never minded being the bad guy. So there was an element of that too. The bad guy just is going to steal this thing from the local. But then Sammy, like a lap or two later, it was a real technical track. Everybody was on the bottom in one corner, but it was like right on the bottom. If you missed it by 6 inches, you were gone. And Sammy slipped up a little bit, and Danny passed him back, and all of a sudden the place just went crazy. So it probably wasn't a great memory for Sammy. I know it's not, but like to be watching it, it was it was a great example of how polarizing he always was. People either loved Sammy or hated him. I mean, everybody likes to be loved, but I don't think it bothered him, whatever people
Right.
thought. And that was interesting too. He was a shy guy who came to the track, did his work, always had just, a couple of guys with him, minded his own business, wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, just was to me, one of the ultimate blue collar racers, of our time.
And one thing that kind of, I don't want to say gets enough credit, but I mean, the one thing that when it started to happen, you're like, wow, this is, maybe we were not underestimating him, but because was the Chili Bowl.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean,
And
here's a sprint car driver, and the next thing you know, he's dominating the biggest midget race
yeah,
in the country.
well, typical of Sammy, he took it seriously. He wasn't going to just go down there and jump in somebody's second or third car and have a good time in Tulsa. He went to the first couple that they had, and then figured out what you had to do to win it. And once he figured out that you could build light stuff and get really creative, I mean, his mind is fascinating. I think he probably is the big, maybe out of the box thinker in open wheel racing. Maybe now it's a little different because more tech companies have come in. But I mean, that car he built that he went on that run with, and let's face it, he won there with a couple different car owners too before that. But once he started running his own stuff, it was amazing. And when you look at the fact that this is all in the late stages of a guy's career, at that time he's already 40 something. He's 50 something, and he was still kicking everybody's ass at Tulsa was kind of cool. And that was another great example of how people either loved Sammy or, you hate to say hated. They either rooted for him strongly or they rooted strongly. But that place would just, it was so evident, when Sammy did something, it was going to be the most noise that happened all week because it was either cheers or boos, but everybody was making noise.
We're talking to Bones Bourcier about the new books on Sammy Swindell, a really, really neat book, of course, with the help of Bob Mays through Speedway Motors, and a really, really neat book. Is there one kind of one story, one photo that you kind of say, wow, I really didn't know that, or that really kind of surprised you?
No, I think most of it, and I hate to say it that way because there are a lot of
Right.
incredible photos. The thing about Sammy, there's interesting phases of his career. That early phase when he was with Bobby Davis Sr. and the Davis electric car. The
Mm-hmm.
kind of the method guys that came out and went to California as a teenager and won races. And then he had that great period in the middle when that we've talked about with Laverne Nance's car and the TMC car and the Outlaw. When it was him and Steve and Wolfie. And then that later phase when he was jumping in and out of all these other divisions and still fielding badass sprint cars, there's an astonishing number of different cars pictured in that book just because he drove so many different cars. Nothing that stands out as the photo, but I mean, and Bob Mays was principally responsible for that. I mean, he rounded up some incredible photos. I had some, Sammy had some. But to me, it's a beautiful book visually, just because there's so many incredible photos in it. Not
Yeah.
just I mean, of Steve, of Wolfgang, of Bobby Davis, of all these, Blaney, all these guys that were in and around sprint car racing at the same time.
Well, it's one of those books when you page through it and that you're gonna go, oh, I remember that, or I forgot
Yeah.
about that. Oh yeah, I remember when he drove that car, this or that, and yeah, the photos are spectacular in here too. You can get it through SpeedwayMotors.com, of course, our friends in Lincoln, Nebraska. Auto Books and Aero Books out of California, you can buy it there, and also, of course, SammySwindellRacing.com. And I'll put links in underneath here in the comments for those who want to buy it. Bones, we certainly appreciate it coming on, and of course, the book is on Sammy Swindell. I mean, this thing really is a home run. It's a and here's the other thing. It's a book that needed to be done too.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's certain guys that you'd hate to think that 20 years from now that a name like that wouldn't be on somebody's bookshelf.
Right.
All those guys that are at the top of their field in different divisions. It's cool that down the road somebody would be able to pick up an actual book and read about a life like that, because it's Sammy was an inspirational guy in a lot of ways. His work ethic was incredible, and I think it's hard not to be if you just look at that side of the guy, that work ethic. It'll take you a long way, like it did with him.
Yeah. Well, we certainly appreciate you taking time out and like I said, this is a neat book. Like we'll post the links. And Bones, anything else coming up? Any projects? Anything you want to push?
Working on a Mark Martin book right now, which has been a work in progress for a little while. Taken longer than we both would have liked, I'm sure, but it's another one of those complex lives that has gone on forever. Another long career with a lot of phases in it. So that's what's kept me busy here lately. But and there's stuff I do for Speed Sport as well. I do a little more than monthly column for those guys. And waiting for spring to come so I can see you and different people at Indianapolis and some of these other racetracks and just have a laugh.
Oh, and I forgot the biggest one. Bones is going in this National Sprint Car Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Iowa. So make sure you go out there. If you want, you can cheer or jeer, whatever you want to do.
Either way.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. That was a surprise, but a welcome one.
I'll give our listeners and viewers a bonus Mark Martin story. So the bonus Mark Martin story that I have is when he drove for Jerry Gunderman in Franklin, Wisconsin, and he lived across the street from my aunt and uncle.
Oh wow!
Aunt and uncle knew nothing about auto racing, could care less about auto racing, but my aunt became good friends with his wife, and they'd come over for coffee and tea and whatnot, and then following year, then he started to do the NASCAR tour. Well, about that same time, my uncle retired, and they said, we're going to get an RV, we're going to travel. So wherever they went, sure enough, they would stumble upon the Martins in their RVs in some park and just rekindle their, and say hi, blah, 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 and they loved it. And I think Mark and his wife loved it because they were just neighbors. At that time, the NASCAR thing was really, really, really big, and the autograph thing, it was just getting out of control. But they really had a good time and were just good, enjoyed themselves. And my aunt would go, he's a race car driver, right? He's a
Yeah, it's probably nice to be anonymous when you're that well known. Those
at that time, especially in the late '90s too. I mean, NASCAR was cooking at that time. So.
And I got to say one thing about Mark that we just said about Sammy. Those two guys, and maybe one or two more. Jeff Bodine kind of strikes me like that. Guys that were just so driven when they were young in short track divisions, and the work ethic of those three guys. I've kind of always lumped those three guys together. Maybe with Gary Ballou, guys that just were all work and all effort. And it's hard, as long as there's talent that goes with that, it's hard to beat those kind of guys.
Well, and I remember the first time I saw Mark Martin in a news, racing periodical. Like, who's this kid? 1978, he was driving. That was his dad's car, right? And Mark Martin Racing, number 2, the dirt Camaro, and then I saw for the first time at the first ASA race at Milwaukee in May of '78. Yeah, and I think he was on the pole or front row. And, we were like, "Oh, this kid can drive." Yeah, he's talented, and
I guess he could.
Well, we'll definitely have you on for that book because Mark Martin is a very interesting character and driver and talented and whatnot, and we appreciate your work, of course. Don't forget, and if you haven't gotten it, this is right here. Rufus. We could go on for hours. There's so many good.
Yeah, we could.
So appreciate it taking time. Maybe we'll do that again. We'll talk about Bernelli. But thanks for taking time out.
Thank you, Steve.
You've been listening to the Traction Reaction podcast. Don't forget to like this video and also subscribe to the channel. We would really appreciate it. Thank you.